Hello, and I'm Bill Peschel, and this is Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents a conversation with Catriona McPherson. She is the author of more than 30 novels that cover wide swaths of the mystery genre, such as historical, humorous, and psychological suspense. She has 15 books in her Dandy Gilver series set in Scotland during the 1920s and 1930s, and she has also written psychological thrillers reminiscent of Gillian Flynn and Leon Moriarty, and 5 books in the Last Ditch mystery series featuring Lexi Campbell, a Scottish therapist living the California dream, and that doesn't even begin to describe it accurately. Her books have won the Anthony Award twice, and other books have been shortlisted for the Mary Higgins Clark, Left Coast Crime, McCavity, and Edgar Awards. And she has also received starred reviews from Kirkus, Library Journal, and Publishers Weekly. Her newest book will come out in December, and it's the 5th book in the Last Ditch series, and it's called Scot in a Trap. So welcome, Catriona McPherson.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here, Bill. I will take that. Gillian Flynn and Leanne Moriarty. I love both of them.
I do.
Yeah, and I apologise for that title, Scot in a Trap, because it's given friends earworms every time they see it. I think of it as Scot in a Trap. Ooh, that's how I think of it every time I think of it.
Well, the books all have different puns in the titles as well, because I'm seeing down here Scot Free, Scot and Soda, Scot on the Rocks, and Scot Mist. Can you tell us a little bit about your background before we begin?
Yes, well, just don't prepare to fall on the ground with shock. I write about a Scot who moves to California, and I am a Scot who moved to California. I'm not a therapist. I just thought that was the funniest thing I could think of. A Scottish person trying to help Californians become more self-actualized. I just thought it would be such a disaster. No, my background is I was an academic linguist. So I taught in a university. I was what you would call a professor. And I love language. I'm very interested in language, but I was no good at being a university professor. I was very unhappy, and I had always wanted to write stories. So in a high stakes move that looked more like a breakdown, I resigned from my tenure track position and sat down. So 22 years ago, it was the start of the new millennium, it was year 2000, and typed chapter 1 into an empty file and thought, look, I'll do some part-time teaching. I thought I'll try this for 5 years, and then I'll just realise that this is a silly pipe dream, and I'll go back and save my pension. But hey, what do you know? Sometimes things work out. So that's how I got into writing, and how I got into mystery fiction is it's what I love. I've always loved to read it, and also I love the community. I wrote a couple of things that are annoyingly not mystery fiction early on, because they could have been. They were so close. If I'd given them a wee nudge, they would have been, and they weren't. And the difference between the experience of being published in the crime fiction world and being published in the open sea of not crime fiction meant that everything else I wrote has been crime fiction ever since.
Yes, those are 2 books. I'm actually going to look them up because it sounds fascinating. Growing Up Again and Straight Up, one of which is time travel humor.
Yeah.
And the second one is Hollywood satire, it seems.
Yeah, there's sort of what the first one, I always thought of it. My working title was Save Elvis. I still think that's a much better title, because the first job of any time traveler, go back, save Elvis, and then see what else you're going to do. Not Gandhi, so that gives you my level, Elvis. And it was based on a bit of my linguistics PhD. I had some time travel in it. Well, not time travel, but counterfactual reality, and trying to trying to explain why it is we can still understand and decide whether we believe statements about enormously counterfactual, non-existent worlds. So it sort of fell out of that. And then the Straight Up is about a liar, and I had never been. It's set partly in Cornwall, partly in New York, and partly in California. And I had never been to California when I wrote it. Oh, such hubris. I'd never been west of Denver. And so when the book came out, I'd say to people, guess which of these 3 places I'd never been to. And they quite often guessed wrong. And I thought, well, that's great. And then I thought, hang on, that means I've completely failed to capture somewhere I've actually been. Like they think I've never been to New York or never been to Cornwall. So I would never do that now, but I was young and I didn't know anything. So I did it then.
But I could see why people would do that because they have their own idea about what Hollywood is like. So if you're relying on your
Mm.
impressions, then chances are they'll match up very nicely.
Mm.
It may not be as in depth of a story, but um, I kind of liken it to my impression of Britain. I am kind of an Anglophile. So it's a mix of Monty Python and Battle of Hastings and Ian Rankin novels set near Edinburgh. And it's going to be a real mix in my head because it's
Yeah,
just going to be a collection of all these plus the 3 days that I spent in London when I was a teenager. So
right.
it's all those impressions. So when you first started, I think was it your first book? Was it the first in the Dandy Gilver series, Gilver,
Yeah,
after
yeah,
the
Gilver.
Armistice Ball?
Yes, yes.
How did you decide to start there?
I'll give you a way to remember with how to pronounce her name, Bill, because she's Gilver. A gillie, if you know about Scottish country estates, a gillie or a gill is a servant, usually out on the land, and ver is Latin for truth, so she is a dandy servant of truth. Ta-da!
Oh,
It's not clever, but it does help you remember what her name is. Um, yeah, how did I? Well, I do remember clearly why I started there because there was another book first, the inevitable getting academic writing out of my system book, which was atrocious and was rejected a lot, and so I put it in a drawer. And remember, I had resigned from my job at this point, so I was feeling a bit shamefaced, and I wrote something just to amuse myself as a palate cleanser. I thought I love Niall Marsh, Marjorie Allingham, Dorothy L. Sayers, Agatha Christie, Courtesy, all those Golden Age writers. So I'm going to write one of them just for fun, and it'll just it'll boost my confidence, and then I'll try to write another book to have published. And so that was the first in this now 15 book long series, and I'm writing book 16 as we speak.
that's good. That's also very interesting because you've got a wide variety of books here and two series that you're continuing to add to. The thing that impressed me about the Dandy Gilver series, at least as far as the Armistice Ball is concerned, how well she does not conform to expectations. She's if I understand correctly, and I'm sorry, I'm still like halfway into the first book, so
Oh,
the
well done.
details.
Thank you. I always say, please read it gently because it was my first effort and it's overwritten because I think that's the law. Your first book has to be a little bit overwritten. Anyway, thank you for persevering.
Yeah, but her my expectations of what her character was going to do in any situation is always turned over. It's never going to be what I expect it to be. She has a very acerbic tone at times. She's like I said, it's just not what I was expecting out of a historical mystery.
Hmm, that's
Now
interesting.
your
Yeah,
book,
I mean, I think some female characters, and I would say women writers as well, sometimes get the sharp end of the stick when it comes to likability. You know, I can't imagine. I mean, it might happen. It might happen a lot, but I can't imagine someone saying to Michael Connolly, "Is Harry Bosch likable?" You know, I just would never happen. So I'm really glad that she comes over as brisk and a little bit bossy and hugely entitled because she starts out anyway in 1922. She's an aristocratic lady. She's very privileged and she's very safe and she's never really had to face anything very much, and that does crumble as the series goes on. Partly because she goes into different situations, that she goes into like miners' cottages and into the heart of a herring fishing industry and things like that, and also that society starts to change. So 1926 was a big year. There was the general strike in Britain, where we know it lasted for 9 days, but they thought it was going to be like the Russian Revolution. They thought the jig's up, or it's over for us and our kind. Um, so that changes. She's not quite so complacent, but she's just as acerbic. She's just as brisk as the books go on, and the relationship between her and her fellow detective, Alec Osborne, becomes more competitive and narky and like siblings, like with a lot of rivalry and trying to get to the answer first, and but also with some kindness there as well.
So, do each of the books center around a particular event?
Yes, for those books I choose the setting first. Uh, so I mean the event is a crime, usually a murder, almost always a murder. Uh, it tends to be the setting, but the setting not just in terms of geography, but in an institutional setting. So there's one in a convent. In fact, this was when I really realised what a fantastic job this was. It was book 5, I think. Yes, I'd just written one. I'd written one set in a circus and no one had stopped me. So that was fun. And I thought, wow, I can really do anything. So I'm going to send her undercover in a grand house during the general strike, so she gets the servants' view of this. And then I thought, well, where next? She went to rival department stores and then to a kind of dotty hospital, a hydropathic treatment hospital where they use electricity and water together to cure or to pretend to cure kind of ills. So, and I just started sending her wherever I wanted her to go. And usually all over Scotland. Not at all so I can go and stay there and deduct it from my taxes. Oh, no, not me.
Well, by the time you get to book 15, The Mirror Dance, what year is that set in?
That is 1938.
1938. So she's aging and
Yes.
and of course changing as she's being exposed to all these. And that's also something I find it reminds me of a series of novels by Lev Raphael, who was an academic, University of Michigan. And his teacher character becomes drawn into various murders. And what I found really fascinating about him, and they're really great books actually, is how he is affected by them. And he actually becomes something of a private detective by book 5 or 6 or 7 because he's changed. You're exposed to bodies, you're exposed to murder, you're exposed to the evil, and you shouldn't be this cheerful person at book 8 that you are in book 1. I don't Detectives aren't, police detectives aren't.
Exactly. I know that. I mean, Dandy and Alec do become Gilver and Osborne detectives. They've got business cards and everything.
Ah,
They're up and running. And for a few books, she keeps it quiet. She keeps it secret from her husband because it would be so unseemly. It's all right if they're having an affair, that would be normal. But if they're engaged in trade, oh my dear. So, but not anymore. But I think it's more the modern. Funnily enough, it's in the comedies. It's in the comedies that are set in California with this displaced Scot, this fish out of water Scot, that I try to make sure that she's suitably not traumatized in that she's got PTSD, because that would be she would then have to change her life. I mean, PTSD is one of those terms like depression that's bandied around a little bit too blithely, I think. So and not everyone gets PTSD from being exposed to horrific events, but she is, shocked and she's upset, and she doesn't fight a body and then just bounce back. She is affected by it. But it helps that she's a professional therapist, so she knows how to deal with what she's experiencing. But yes, exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up, because people don't.
mm-hmm.
You look at these professional police, for instance, who've dealt with a murder, like, well, Vera, or Inspector Morse, Inspector Frost, Inspector Lewis, all the inspectors, they would be gibbering wrecks. They would have been invalided out of the force long before we get to the series or season that we're on. Yeah, it's one of the bits of the suspension of disbelief that I think gets ignored
Yeah.
in this confection that we write about.
Well, but we also see is that they have a different sense of humor. And it's the type of humor that civilians would definitely not understand, much like people in the military.
Yeah,
Their
yeah,
sense of humor about various things happening it was World War I veterans had talked about, or that became obvious about World War I veterans, or any war veterans for it really, is that they can't talk about what they experienced
exactly.
except to other veterans, because
Mm,
they understand why you find something funny on the battlefield or something horrifying but also hilarious on the battlefield, because that's the only way you can deal with the
Mm.
memories and the trauma from that. Now, let's go on ahead and we can talk about Lexi, because as I understand it, this was something that came up between your editor and yourself, a new series. You had mentioned
Yes,
this.
it was. Yeah, we were having breakfast at a conference in, I think, Phoenix, maybe, but in convention land somewhere. I think it was Phoenix, maybe. And she said, we'd like another series from you. Not a different series, an additional series. And we'd like it to be, there are always laughs in my books, all of them, even the very dark ones. There's always some humour, but she said, we want it to be a comedy. In fact, what she said is, we want you, like you are on a panel, like you are on a stage, but as a mystery novel. And it's got to be funny, which it was quite intimidating, because I thought, if you set out your stall and you say this is a comedy and people don't laugh, that's much more of a problem than if people don't laugh for the few laughs there are, in a dark psychological thriller set in a psychiatric hospital, for instance. Um, and she wanted it to be set in America. And I thought, well, I can't do that. I'd lived here for 6 years by then. But I thought, well, I could write a Scottish voice set in America. I'll do that. And then the idea struck me that she would be a therapist. Um, and then the idea struck me that she would be a broke therapist, newly divorced, and really on her uppers. And so she'd live in a motel because she wouldn't be able to afford to live anywhere else. And this was before that wonderful film, The Florida Project. I don't know if you've seen The Florida Project,
No,
that's
I
set
haven't.
in a motel, very rundown motel in near Disneyland. It's a wonderful movie, but it was before that, and it was before Schitt's Creek. I just want
Mhm.
to say that. I adore Schitt's Creek. But what I thought was, she'll live in a motel, and so everybody else will be transient. So there'll be a new cast of characters in every book, and someone gets killed, and then she can solve it, and no harm, no foul. And then, because I've got no discipline whatsoever, I fell in love with the characters I wrote in the first book. So there's a single parent, and Della and her little boy Diego, who were staying in one of the downstairs. So it's an old-fashioned horseshoe style motel with a walkway, and it's not fancy. It's got a laundromat on one of the arms of the horseshoe. And there was a couple, and I think they were just driving past, Kathy and Nolene. They were just driving past, and then there's a pair of doctors, Todd and Roger, who are staying in the motel while their house is being tented for bugs, because one of them has got kleptoparasitosis, which is a fear of imaginary bugs in the environment. That means a horrible psychiatric condition that he suffers from. And I thought, well, these people will be there for one book. And then while I was writing it, I thought, no, I don't want them to be here for one book. And I certainly don't want any of these people to die. So I made Kathy and Nolene own the motel and the laundromat. Todd and Roger live in the motel because it's safe from bugs, because Kathy gets insecticide from her cousin in Costa Rica that's completely illegal in California. In fact, in book one, I say it's so good, it's even illegal in Nevada. So it's safe and he can stay there. And Della, I thought, well, sadly, um, Della, probably you don't really need to work very hard to make it that she lives in a motel permanently. She's not documented and she's a single parent. She's got this little boy. She might well live in this motel permanently. So they're all still there. Book 5, they're all still there.
Yes, and by the end of the first book, Lexi gets a houseboat.
Yes.
So she's living on a houseboat behind the hotel, if I
Yes, in the
understand that
last ditch.
correctly.
It's the Last Ditch
Mm.
Slough that gives the Last Ditch Motel its name, which is not a great name for a motel. But she lives on, and for anyone who's in the Bay Area of San Francisco, it is the houseboat that's on the pier with all the historical boats that you can visit. So it's got tall ships and various things, and there's a wee houseboat in dry dock, and that's Lexi's boat. Just because I visited it and went, oh, it's like being in a doll's house. It's so cute. And also, one of the things I missed when I moved here was old stuff, like old scruffy stuff. Everything's so bright and new, and kind of. When we first came here, the reason I'm here is my husband's a professor at UC Davis, So there's the same reason everyone's in Davis who, doesn't belong there. And we drove into town and looked around and went, well, I won't say the word that we said. It's Sunnydale. It was just like, it just looked like Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Mhm.
Everything was the colour of ice cream and all these golden, perfect, naked students. 35,000 of them. Um, so I really missed the old stuff, and that's why Lexi lives on a houseboat. I am not disciplined at all. I can't believe that I get to do this and then they pay me. It's great.
It's funny that you say you're not disciplined, and yet here you are with 30 books um, coming out over the less than 20 years. So
Well,
I
I'm
find
disciplined in that I do like write. The structure is disciplined. I write 2,000 words every day, 5 days a week until it's done. But what happens when that door's closed, that Hemingway thing of write drunk and edit sober. I don't write drunk, but I don't need to write drunk because I just write chaotic nonsense anyway. And I don't care. Nobody's ever going to see it. You can't embarrass yourself. I don't think you can embarrass yourself. So I'm disciplined in the when I do it, but what I do, it's
but
just fun.
I think that's part of the writer armor that you have to develop, or that some people have no problem at all putting themselves out. They're called rhino hides, and then there's some like myself where I've published 30 books through my press, but very little of it is actually mine. I annotate novels and I publish my wife's work as well. So, and that's something I have to deal with all the time. Is
Yeah,
being able to put out something that is not me, but I feel
mhm.
like it is because it's reflective of my sensibility and intelligence.
This only the first draft when I'm like that. I
Uh,
don't show anyone my first draft, but by the time I'm finished, say 4 or 5 drafts, by the time I'm finished with the book, and I know when I'm finished with the book because I hate it, every page, and I know it off by heart. And if someone was to read me a sentence, I'd be able to just keep going, and I'd do it in this voice. I just hate it, and I think that's that when my response to any potential problem is, oh, just cut it, just cut the paragraph, cut the whole page. I know that's time to give it away. And once I've given it away, I don't find it that difficult to take editorial content, and I don't really care about. I mean, I care, but I don't get wounded by trade reviews, and I don't read reader reviews on Amazon because they're not for me. I think why anyone who goes to their Amazon page and reads the reader reviews of their own book, why would you do that?
yeah,
That's because you're overhearing something that you're never meant to. I mean, I read Amazon reviews of books I'm thinking about buying, but not of my own books. So,
that's very wise. That is absolutely very wise. Well, it's a shame in a way to talk about your prose this way, because what I've been reading Strangers at the Gate as well.
all right, yeah.
That's what I've been reading, and what I found, there's this wonderful line that I just it just stopped me dead, and it's very short because it was 4 o'clock and black as hate outside.
Oh, I don't even remember writing that.
Just
Yeah.
using the word hate in that context, and it fit very well with the sensitivity I thought of, because it reminded me, and only in terms of the background of where it takes place in the
Yes.
woods I
Where
can't remember
it can be dark at 4 o'clock in December, sort of late November through to mid-January. It is dark at 4 o'clock in Scotland because it's so far north.
but
Yeah.
it reminded me of Twin Peaks.
Oh, thank you. Love
Just the
Twin
way
Peaks.
the landscape
Yeah.
looks and the music. As I'm reading through this, I can hear the soundtrack in my, and it doesn't have all the other odd, well, it does have odd stuff, but not in the same way as David
No, not
Lynch.
in the same way. No.
It's not Lynchian. No dancing dwarves and
No.
dream sequences or anything like that.
No.
But it was very intensely moody, and like I said, that sentence just stopped me cold, because it was just such a perfect distillation of that moment in so few words.
Thank you. Yeah, that book was one where my lack of discipline meant that I killed the person that I killed in that book was someone I absolutely loved, but it just happened. That's who dies. And I can remember writing that and thinking, oh no, I would have loved to spend the rest of this novel writing that character. And there that person is, dead in a pool of blood on the floor. Ocht. But what are you going to do?
That's true, but that's how you write. You're
Yeah,
more of a pantser
yeah.
than a
Oh,
plotter.
yeah.
You really
Huge
look.
pantser. Oh my God, Bill, huge pantser. I am at 66,000 words of the first draft of Dandy Gilver number 16, and I think the first draft will come out about 80. Haven't a clue who done it.
Hmm.
Not a clue. And it is beginning to bug me because I probably need to find out by the end of next week.
And then is that when you go back in and kind of put in anything to reinforce that, or does the plot naturally dictate who does it?
Usually the plot dictates who does it. So I'll work it out and then I'll leave it, and I'm going to edit this one starting in March. So I'll get to the end of the first draft and I'll print it out and I'll leave it aside and I'll go back to it in March and fix
Mm-hmm.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. That's your next project, is the next Dandy Gilver novel, and you have a new one. Can you tell us about the new Last Ditch coming out in December?
Oh
It's going to
yes,
be
it's
published
coming
in
out.
December.
It's coming out at the perfect time. So for some reason the first book started on the 4th of July and then the second book started organically at Halloween. And then I thought, oh, I'm just going to start every one of them on a holiday. So we've had Valentine's Day and and then the lockdown comedy. So it seemed like a good time to have a closed circle mystery when it's the start of the pandemic and they all locked down together in April 2020. So that was like an anti-holiday. That was the day that the California governor closed Disneyland. It's the day least like a holiday ever. And this one starts on Thanksgiving and runs for what I say, it's a week of murder and leftovers. So the book actually comes out on the day when the characters in the book finish the last pie. I think it's a pecan pie because it's got the most sugar in it and no cream and it doesn't go off. So yes, it starts at Thanksgiving, and so it's lots of food, lots and lots of food, and I've revisited my astonishment at the Thanksgiving menu from the early years that I lived here. I looked at this table and thought, I can't believe what's on this table. This is just incredible
In what way?
and delicious.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm back to doing a live face to face proper launch party, and this tickles me no end because the launch party is going to be in the real version of the bookshop that's in the book, because these books are set in a very lightly fictionalized version of the town where I live, and there's a scene in the bookstore, so I'm going to be in the bookstore reading the scene in the bookstore, trying to convince the people who work in the bookstore that the obnoxious bookseller in the book is not based on anyone. And she's really not. The place is absolutely Davis, California. In fact, on my website, there's a little quiz about the Easter eggs. Like, can you find all the little hidden things in the book? But none of the people are real. But yeah, that's what it's about. Someone comes and gets murdered in the motel, and it is someone from Lexi's past, and she's the only person who knows this dead guy, and she's the only person with a motive, and she's also got opportunity and means.
Yep.
So it's caught in a trap.
Mm-hmm.
There's the title.
Well, I see we're running out of time, so I'm going to have to let you go. But I want to say it was a real pleasure talking with you. I'd love to have another interview with you so we could go a little bit more into the psychological thrillers as well, because there's just a lot. There's a lot there to unpack. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, I mean, say what you like about me. I can talk, right? Thank you.
And where could people find out more about you?
Oh, yes, very easy. I'm at www.catrinamcpherson.com. I am on Facebook as Catriona McPherson, and I'm on Twitter as Catriona McP because my name's too long. And I still haven't got round to Instagram, unfortunately. But I'm in those three places.
Yeah. And of course, Catriona's books are available at the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop as well.
Thank
So
you.
I want to thank you very much for appearing. And I hope for the people at home that your favorite book is the next book you read. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you. Bye.